Reji has to be one of the most mysterious characters in all of Beyblade. I mean, he was built up as this imposing antagonist who struck fear into the hearts of his opponents, yet we know nothing about him. Seriously, there are so many questions surrounding the character of Reji that we simply have no answers for. Like, how did he meet Doji? How did he get the dark power? Why did he disappear after Metal Fusion? And so much more. I could legit farm theory videos about Reji and have like 6 months worth of content ready to go. That's how little we know about Reji. So I thought for today's video, we could set out to answer at least one of the many questions surrounding his character, and that is, what happened to Reji after Metal Fusion? After all, he was a huge part of the Dark Nebula and Battle Bladers, but once the new season dropped, he was nowhere to be seen. And characters get left behind all the time, but they usually all come back for at least a small cameo. But Reji, on the other hand, quite literally fell off the face of the earth because we never saw him again. So today, we have a theory that could potentially explain everything. It would give us an answer as to what Reji was doing post-Metal Fusion. It would tell us why he never re-emerged as a threat like Doji did, and it would also provide us with an amazing explanation for one of Gravity Destroyer's abilities, and that would honestly make seasons 1 and 2 feel a lot more connected. So yeah, this theory checks a ton of boxes, and it's overall a fun explanation as opposed to he just quit Beyblade. Here's a rough explanation. This theory basically has Reji running into Julian Concern. The two would then battle, and it ends with Julian absorbing Reji's power. It's obviously a lot more complicated, but that's the general idea, and I like this theory for a ton of reasons. It gives Reji something to do post-Metal Fusion, and it would give us an amazing fight. But I think the coolest part of this theory is that it would explain how Julian got the Eyes of Medusa. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because before we take a deep dive into this theory, there are a ton of things we have to address. There's some background things we need to go over. There are a few problems with this theory that we do need to solve. We have to find a time frame which fits the show's canon timeline, and then we're actually going to go through this theory as if it was actually playing out step by step. So buckle up, because we're about to go through so many things here. Let's kick things off by addressing a few of the major problems within our theory that could be used to argue against it. The first issue we're going to look at specifically surrounds the origins of Julian's Eyes of Medusa. So basically, I'm here trying to argue that Julian absorbing Reji's power is what gave him Medusa's abilities. That's the whole premise of this theory. But the problem is, Julian already gave us an explanation on how he has Medusa's eyes. According to legend, Perseus slayed Medusa, and he then used her head to freeze his enemies. And that's true, it happened in the show. I'm not trying to disprove that. So at this point, you could make the argument that my theory explaining the Eyes of Medusa is wrong, because we already have an explanation that's in the show, and that is a fair argument. But for our theory to work, that doesn't necessarily have to change. That story of Perseus slaying Medusa can stay true, but as Destroyer's owner, maybe Julian had to defeat his own version of Medusa before he could use that power too. What I'm getting at is, I think both explanations can coexist, but the one that actually granted Julian Medusa's power was taking down Reji, not Perseus taking down Medusa. So that problem is solved. Now let's move on to another major issue, but this time it's surrounding power absorption. Obviously, a very crucial part of this theory is Julian absorbing Reji's power. In fact, I'd say the entire theory rides on Julian being able to do so, because without that, we don't have a theory. Everything just falls apart. So then the next logical question becomes, how does Julian absorb power? Because it's really easy to sit here and say, yeah, he's just going to absorb Reji's power, blah, 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 but how is he actually going to do it? That's the question we have to answer, because power absorption on this scale is extremely rare. I mean, there are only 2 bladers who could even be capable of doing something like this, and that's Ryuga and Rago. Rago can absorb power because it's an ability of Nemesis, and Ryuga did it through the dark power and later on through his own power. But those are the only 2 exceptions. I mean, even Tsubasa, who literally contracted the dark power from Ryuga himself, couldn't even absorb other people's power. Bottom line is, it's a rare ability. So for this theory to work, how does Julian absorb power when it's an ability he clearly doesn't have? Well, what we can do is turn to other instances where power absorption occurred with characters other than Ryuga and Rago. For example, Kenta was able to take Ryuga's power because I guess they had a strong bond and Ryuga wanted to give it to him, and Jinga was able to borrow everyone's power while fighting Rago. Now, these two examples are definitely not the same as Ryuga and Rago absorbing power. I mean, Jinga and Kenta technically absorbed power here, but they can't do it to just any random person. It was very situational, and it was very much a one-time thing compared to Ryuga or Rago, who can absorb power from anyone at any time. So maybe the examples of Jinga and Kenta didn't prove much, but I think it shows that there could be another way for Julian to absorb power, and we will get into it when that time comes. So now that we've addressed the two main issues with this theory, let's talk about a potential time frame that we're working with here. After all, we are trying to add something to the Metal series timeline, so we have to make sure that we're not changing or messing with events that are already in the timeline. So this theory basically starts right after Reji loses in Battle Bladers, and it'll have to conclude right before Julian's matchup against Desert Blaze. This is because we're trying to argue that this theory gave Julian the Eyes of Medusa, so logically it has to take place before he used the Eyes of Medusa. That actually leaves us with not a ton of time for this theory because Julian used the Eyes of Medusa in episode 12, which is pretty early on. But anyways, that's our time frame, the tail end of Metal Fusion to episode 12 of Metal Masters. Now that we've established that, let's finally jump into this theory and see how everything plays out. We'll start at the beginning of our time frame with Regi's loss to Jinga, and look, there's nothing I can really say about this loss that hasn't been said already. It was an amazing battle, great moment for Jinga, and probably very traumatizing for Reji. Now, because he lost, it's very possible that his power could have gotten offered up to Ryuga, like all the rest of the Dark Nebula members. I personally don't believe this though, because of what happened to Doji. After his match with Phoenix, Ryuga basically jumped him for his power, and El Drago itself looked like it took Doji's spirit or something. It was crazy, but basically, after Ryuga did this to him, there's no way Doji would help him out by feeding him Regi's power. And that's assuming he's in good enough health to do so, because El Drago really looked like he messed Doji up. But let's just say he recovered after El Drago's attack. He still is the one who prepares all of El Drago's meals, and let's be real, he's simply not preparing another one, not after what Ryuga just did to him. So, I think Reji makes it out of Metal Fusion with his power intact, so that's good, I guess. But now let's take a look at this picture. This is actually the last frame of Reji that we ever saw in the Metal series. While Jinga and the others were celebrating his win against Ryuga, it looked like Reji was walking away before he turned back to face us one last time, and then he disappeared. So yeah, beyond this point is where the speculation begins, but let's talk a bit about Reji's character right now. After Reji loses to Jinga, I'd argue his spirit would kind of be broken. It's sort of like a Damien situation. Here we have two characters whose whole beings were based on, one, striking fear into opponents, and for Damien, it was being the chosen one. These two lived their entire lives for these sole purposes, only to have it all completely crushed by Jinga and Kyoya. Damien lost to Kyoya after receiving his ultimate arrangement, which pretty much proved he wasn't the chosen one. And for Reji, he lost to Jinga, but even worse, Jinga didn't experience any fear in their match. In fact, he was laughing and having a great time. That's quite literally the opposite of what Reji stands for, and as you could imagine, this loss affected him. I mean, just look at his expression as he realizes he's now the one feeling fear instead of being the one inflicting it. He even metaphorically turns to stone, which is incredibly symbolic of how he's probably feeling. So, I don't really know what he was up to during the Ryuga-Kyoya match, and then eventually the Jinga-Ryuga match, but eventually, I think he'd want to leave Japan at least for a little bit. Let's just say he needs a change of scenery so he can forget what Jinga did to him. And here comes the first big stretch of our theory, but basically we're going to have Reji go to the airport and decide to go somewhere in Europe. Now, we chose Europe because this theory has him running into Julian, so we kind of need Reji going to Europe, but there are ways to explain it that would make sense in the story. Let's just say after his loss, Reji is angry, and he wants nothing more than to traumatize more Bladers by breaking more Beyblades. And if he was leaving Japan, we know the next best place for him is probably somewhere in Europe, as they have a pretty advanced Beyblade culture. The EU had Blader representatives from every member country for the Festival of Warriors, and those reps champs were likely selected in a whole other tournament just for their country. So basically what I'm saying is there's a ton of tournaments, a ton of bladers, and a ton of battles going down in Europe all the time, and it's all relatively close together. So if Reji really wants to do what Reji does best, Europe is definitely his best option. So Reji's going to go to Europe, probably a major city, because the more people there are, the more bladers there are. So we could be in Madrid, Berlin, Paris, we could be somewhere in Greece like Athens. It doesn't really matter. Whichever city Reji chooses, his goal stays the same. Terrorize bladers until he builds himself back up to get his revenge on Jenga, or just terrorize bladers for the fun of it. He would probably start off by joining those little street battles, kind of like we saw in Brazil, and because Reji was top 4 in battle bladers, he would dominate. In just a few weeks, he could destroy so many Beyblades, and with each one, Reji begins to feel more and more like himself again. But that wouldn't be the only thing changing. I'd also argue that as Reji continued winning so many battles in such brutal fashion, the dark power inside of him would continue to grow. I mean, Ryuga's dark power grew as he continued to take people's power, so it kind of makes sense that Reji's dark power could grow as more and more people fear him. I mean, we only saw Reji battle 4 times, so who knows what his dark power was truly capable of had it continued to grow. So as Reji continues inflicting fear on his European opponents, his appearance could also start to change, just as Ryuga's did, as he got more and more dark power. Reji's skin, his eyes, and his overall facial structure would all probably change as he continued to grow with the dark power. For Ryuga, his altered appearance seemed to somewhat resemble a dragon, so for Reji it could be the same. His appearance could slowly adopt some characteristics of his Beyblade's avatar, just like Ryuga. But personally, I would like it better, and I think it'd be better for the theory, if he adopted characteristics from his Medusa avatar instead of the snake one. So this means he'd eventually get those red eyes, maybe his skin would slowly transition into scales, and his hair could even slowly turn into snakes. Now I understand these are pretty drastic changes for Reji to go through, but look, the dark power is more than capable of doing this to someone. We've seen it before. And to try and justify this even more, I've come up with a tiny idea about the origins of Serpent. It's definitely a stretch, definitely up the alley of an insane fan theory, but hear me out. We don't really know how Reji got Serpent. Like, did Doji make it for him, or did he always have it? We don't know. So what if we just say that Doji found Serpent just like he found El Drago, and he then gave it to Reji? And then on top of that, we could say Serpent is just like Pegasus, El Drago, and Varieris, in the sense that it's a Beyblade with a very complex backstory that comes from legend. And its story from legend could be a very interesting one relating to Medusa. Now, continue to stick with me. I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you, but what if we have the actual Beyblade of Serpent be like a physical manifestation of Medusa's will? Or Serpent could just have a curse that Medusa put on it, something along those lines. This would obviously have to be before Perseus slayed her, but again, something like this could be the origins of Serpent. And if Serpent really is a product of Medusa's will, then Regi's slow transition into looking like Medusa through the dark power would start to make a whole lot of sense. So yeah, this would mean Reji has a completely different branch of the dark power from Ryuga, which would be pretty interesting. We all know Ryuga's dark power, of course, came from a star fragment, while Regi's dark power in this case would be from Medusa's curse and her spirit. Again, it's a huge stretch, but it would be very cool, and it would also allow Reji to become possessed like Ryuga was, which kind of helps our theory. So yeah, as Reji continues winning these battles, he'd slowly fall under the control of Medusa's curse, and he'd become a monster like Ryuga did. It could even get so bad to the point where whichever city he's at would have to set a curfew for bladers, like you can't be out battling past 10 p.m. or you're at risk of being attacked by Reji. Something like that would be really cool. And you could also have the news of this whole Reji thing spread all over the place to the point where there's a ton of rumors, and with that, you could have some people who don't even believe in Reji and call him like a myth or an urban legend. That I think would be very cool and very fitting for Reji's character at this point. But anyways, maybe after 2 or 3 weeks in Europe, terrorizing these bladers and making a name for himself, Reji would have finally garnered enough attention for Julian Konzern to get involved. Julian would eventually find him at whatever city he's at, and Reji would be thrilled with this opportunity of crushing the head honcho of European Beyblade, so we don't have to worry about Reji running away. He wants all the smoke. So now we've finally arrived at the point in the theory where Julian and Reji actually battle. And look, a normal battle between Julian and Reji would be amazing, amazing, but this isn't normal Reji we're dealing with. Once again, he's all the way juiced up on the dark power, and who knows how strong that could make him. I mean, just look at how strong Ryuga was with his dark power. The possibilities are limitless for how strong Reji could be, but with that being said, we do have to put some limits on them. First and foremost, however strong we want full dark power Reji to become, no matter what, he cannot surpass Ryuga's dark power form, and to be honest, he shouldn't even be able to get close. Just think about it. If he was on par with Ryuga, it would be massive news worldwide, and we would have heard about it in the show 1000%, and the fact that we didn't hear about it at some point in the series disproves that it happened. But also just consider this. If we had another dark power situation just as serious as Ryuga's, and it took place just a few weeks later, it would definitely cheapen the effect of Ryuga's dark power arc. So basically, Reji can be strong, he can be mean, but he cannot even come close to Ryuga's level of dark power destruction. It just can't happen. Like if Ryuga's dark power situation is the Avengers fighting Thanos in outer space, Regi's situation should be like Daredevil beating up a couple of crooks on the street. It can still be good, it can be entertaining, but it just can't be as big of a deal as dark power Ryuga, and that's okay. So Reji is definitely going to be strong, but eventually Julian, with maybe the help of Whale's Sophie and Klaus, would defeat him. And I think Julian winning this match would break the curse Medusa has on Serpent, thus freeing Reji from the dark power. And as far as Julian actually absorbing the power, it's still pretty complicated. Maybe we could say that because he broke the curse and ended this version of the dark power, maybe he somehow was granted its ability. I'm sorry guys, I just couldn't really come up with a great explanation on how he can actually absorb power, but I think everything else in this theory is near perfect. If you have a better explanation, please comment down below. Maybe it could go a little something like this. After Regi's loss, the dark power would begin siphoning out of Serpent, and instead of letting this energy find a new host, Julian would hold up his bay, and it would take in that energy. But because he beat this version of the dark power and ended Medusa's curse, maybe he takes it in as normal power instead of dark power. Obviously, it'd be a lot more detailed and complicated than that, but I think something along those lines could be pretty cool. Once again, if you have a better explanation, please let us know. But with that being said, that's the whole theory. It started with Reji losing to Jinga. He was very angry. He wanted nothing more than to destroy Beyblades. He moves to Europe. He starts stirring up some trouble there. He builds up a name for himself. And with each battle, the dark power inside of him grows more and more until he's possessed like Ryuga was. And then eventually Julian shows up. He defeats Reji and he absorbs that dark power. So please let me know what you think about this theory. It took a very long time to make, but it was so much fun. Let me know what you think about the actual theory. Let me know what you think about the whole Medusa's curse on Serpent thing. If you have any other theories or any other ideas you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.